You just made some pretty definitive statements about, your belief that President Trump was guilty of these charges. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe we had proof beyond a reasonable doubt in both cases.
And doesn't the Justice Manual prohibit prosecutors from asserting that a defendant is guilty of something before a jury makes a determination?
When a case is pending, yes.
Donald Trump and the MAGA movement repeatedly rely on a single argument that they invoke the First Amendment, claiming that all of Trump's statements about election fraud are protected by free speech. But before Congress, Jack Smith dismantled that argument in a cold, systematic way. Jack Smith emphasized that U.S. history has seen many disputed elections. In 1800, 1960, and 2000, losing candidates all spoke out, but there is no precedent for a sitting president using fraud allegations that had already been rejected to organize, direct, and push actions aimed at delaying or overturning the transfer of power. There is no precedent for a sitting president, knowing he had lost, deliberately constructing a chain of actions to reverse the result at all costs. That difference is what forms the core of the case, and this is the central point Jack Smith returned to repeatedly throughout the hearing. Trump is not being prosecuted for saying the election was fraudulent. Trump is being prosecuted for knowing those claims were false, yet still using them as a tool to delay, pressure, manipulate, and ultimately obstruct the lawful transfer of power. What makes this case particularly dangerous for Trump lies not only in the legal argument, but in the human element. Trump was not acting in a state of ignorance. According to the investigation, he was repeatedly warned by people he trusted most: state election officials, legal advisors, legislative leaders, many of them members of the Republican Party who had supported Trump and campaigned for him. They told him there was no fraud large enough to overturn the outcome. They told him the fake elector schemes were illegal. They warned him that pressuring Congress would violate federal law. But Trump did the opposite. He rejected every unfavorable piece of information and clung only to theories, no matter how flimsy, as long as they allowed him to keep holding on to power. Jack Smith described a consistent pattern of behavior. Every time Trump received information showing he could not remain in office, he dismissed it. Every time a theory appeared, no matter how baseless, that still allowed him to cling to power, he immediately embraced it. This was not confusion. It was a deliberate choice. Then came January 6th, was when violence erupted at the Capitol. Trump was not merely a passive observer. According to Jack Smith's argument, Trump knew exactly what was happening. He received calls from his closest allies. He knew Vice President Mike Pence was in danger, yet he refused to act to stop it. No order, no call to end it, no intervention. Instead, Trump continued directing associates to call lawmakers, pushing to delay the certification of the results. This is the moment when criminal intent becomes decisive. This was not accidental, not chaos. It was calculated action taken while violence was unfolding. That is why prosecutors collected call records, not to eavesdrop, not to invade privacy, but to reconstruct the timeline. Jack Smith stressed that what was collected was purely technical data: call times, outgoing numbers, incoming numbers, and duration. No content, no recordings, and everything fully complied with legal procedures. Jack Smith's message was clear. If Trump had called Democratic lawmakers, their data would have been collected as well. Responsibility does not lie in who was investigated, but in who triggered the chain of actions. And that person, according to Smith, was Donald Trump. The hearing ended not with a fiery accusation, but with a cold conclusion. Legal responsibility flows from actions, not political views. And what Jack Smith presented to Congress revealed something deeply troubling for Trump. The case was built not on emotion, but on a tight legal structure, supported by witnesses Trump himself once trusted most. In his testimony before Congress, Jack Smith did not avoid questions about the figures around Trump. On the contrary, he went straight to the point. This was not an isolated act by a single impulsive individual, but a coordinated network with assigned roles, timing, and clearly defined objectives. One of the most frequently mentioned names was Boris Epstein. Jack Smith identified Epstein not as an outsider, but as one of the central co-conspirators. He was directly involved in the fake elector plan, spread baseless fraud allegations, and most importantly played a coordinating role in calls to lawmakers on January 6th. Epstein did not deny that the calls took place. During questioning by prosecutors, he admitted that Trump's associates attempted to contact many Republican Party senators and representatives. What Epstein tried to avoid was the question of who gave the orders, but according to Jack Smith, the text message records make it clear these actions were not spontaneous. They were carried out under direct direction from Trump. Then there was Steve Bannon on before January 6th. Bannon publicly stated that everything is going to blow up at the Capitol, and at the time, those words were dismissed as political exaggeration. But in the context of the investigation, they took on a completely different meaning. Jack Smith revealed that prosecutors have evidence showing that Bannon, after a period of silence, resumed frequent contact with Trump ahead of January 6th, and even as the riot was unfolding, Bannon was still texting with Epstein. The content was not a call to stop the violence, but a cold response. Trump was still fired up. That phrase, in the eyes of prosecutors, was not emotional, it was operational. It aligned in time with calls being made to lawmakers while the Capitol was under attack and the vice president was being evacuated. This was the intersection of real-world violence and backstage political commands. Rudy Giuliani also appears in this picture. Not by chance. Giuliani admitted to prosecutors that he contacted only Republican Party lawmakers. The reason was simple. He believed only they would be willing to cooperate. That statement, according to Jack Smith, inadvertently confirmed a crucial element of the case: the selection of targets based on partisan loyalty, not on legitimate legal argument. A major question raised in Congress was, if the co-conspirators are so clearly identified, why were they not charged? Jack Smith did not dodge it. He stated plainly that prosecutors analyzed the evidence against each individual. In some cases, there was sufficient basis to bring charges, but before final decisions were made, the political landscape changed. Donald Trump won the election, and with that victory, the special counsel's office was dissolved under existing rules. That does not mean the conduct disappeared. It only means the legal process was halted, not because of a lack of evidence, but because of institutional limits. This was the heaviest moment of the hearing, because it exposed a reality. In the US system, a political victory can stop an unfinished legal process, no matter how extensively the case has been built. Another part of the record that Jack Smith was largely barred from discussing was the classified documents case at Mar-a-Lagos. His lawyers informed Congress that, under a judge's order and the current position of the Department of Justice, Smith was prohibited from disclosing the contents of Volume 2 of the report. But even within those limits, the message was clear. Jack Smith affirmed that his office had gathered evidence showing Trump intentionally retained classified documents after leaving office, stored them in unsecured locations, and repeatedly attempted to obstruct their recovery. The inability to release the report at this time does not mean its contents do not exist. When asked about the Supreme Court ruling related to presidential immunity, Jack Smith expressed clear disagreement but accepted the legal reality. He said the court had expanded the scope of executive power beyond what prosecutors had argued. However, that ruling does not erase the entire case.